house sits quietly on a street corner, its stone walls weathered and moss-speckled, holding stories that whisper through the cracks. From a distance, it might appear to be any other old, unremarkable home, gray and solemn, surrounded by beds of flowers. But closer inspection reveals its morbid secret. This house, its chimney, and its walkways are all made quite literally of tombstones. Tonight, we're talking about the creepy and some say haunted Tombstone House in Petersburg, Virginia. Hello, all my fellow creepy little weirdos. My name is Christina, and I will be your tour guide through the realms of the unexplained, the paranormal, and the just plain weird. Welcome to Horror, History, and Haunting. The Poplar Grove National Cemetery in Petersburg, Virginia, was a solemn place. Rows upon rows of white marble headstones stood as silent sentinels over the graves of the Union soldiers who had fallen during the Civil War. Over 6,000 men rested beneath the soil, their final words carved into stone, their names, ranks, dates of death, and in some cases, simple phrases like unknown soldier. The cemetery, with its iron gates and solemn air, was a reminder of the bloody battles fought in and around Petersburg, where the clash between North and South had left an undeniable scar. By the end of the 20th century, time had begun to weather these marble headstones. Some leaned at awkward angles, others were chipped and worn by decades of exposure to wind and rain. The headstones suffered because of no funding during the Great Depression. The city decided that to save money on upkeep, they would cut the tombstones in half and place the top half flat on the ground so they could just mow right over, saving money on the maintenance costs. The bottom half of the headstones were removed during the process, and they numbered more than 2,200. They were piled up outside the cemetery awaiting disposal. They were no longer needed, no longer viewed as markers for the fallen, but simply as discarded stone. Now, I couldn't find much information on Oswald Young, but he will always be remembered for his practical ingenuity. He was obviously not a man easily unnerved, nor was he one to shy away from the controversy if it served his purpose. To Young, the discarded headstones at Poplar Grove presented an opportunity. With a strange kind of pragmatism, Young saw these headstones as valuable building materials. After all, marble was durable, heavy, and very expensive, and here it was, ready for the taking. The thought of using them to construct a house, his house, it didn't seem morbid to him, it seemed efficient. So he made his move. Young purchased hundreds of the headstones for $45 apiece, transporting them to the plot of land he owned on the outskirts of town. He didn't intend to honor the dead with them, no. He would be repurposing them into something useful, something alive. So they began the construction of what would come to be known as the Tombstone House. As the house began to rise, layer by layer, it was clear that this was no ordinary home. From a distance, the structure looked like any other stone building, gray and cold, with walls that would last for centuries. You can feel the faint traces of lives that had once been, now transformed into something else entirely. The interior of the house was as peculiar as its walls. Cold to the touch, the stones radiated a strange energy, as if the stories of the soldiers were still trapped within them. The house was spacious, sturdy, but it lacked warmth. It felt more like a mausoleum than a home, the echoes of the past woven into its very foundations. The soldiers whose headstones had been taken to build the Tombstone House were not famous generals or men of high rank. Many were privates and foot soldiers, boys from small towns and farms who had enlisted to fight in a war that would reshape the nation. Most were Union soldiers, having died in the brutal siege of Petersburg, a 9-month campaign that had been one of the final, bloodiest chapters of the Civil War. They had come from places like New York, Pennsylvania, Ohio, marching south into the heart of the Confederacy. Many had fallen in the trenches or during the futile charges against the Confederate defenses. Their bodies had been hastily buried in mass graves, only to be reinterred at the Poplar Grave years later, after the war had ended. Many of them never to be identified. For decades, their headstones had stood vigil over their resting places, marking their sacrifice. Now, these markers have been torn away and reused, their names no longer just tied to a specific grave, but spread out across the walls of the young house. Some believe this act had disturbed the soldiers' eternal rest. Locals who walked by the house at night claimed they heard whispers, faint and unintelligible, drifting from the direction of the stone walls. Others spoke of strange shadows that moved across the windows, though no one was inside. The house, it seemed, carried the weight of its history like a burden. The soldiers it had entombed within its walls, refusing to be forgotten. Years passed, and the Tombstone House became a curiosity in Petersburg. There were strange occurrences, footsteps heard in empty rooms, cold drafts that moved through the house even on the hottest summer days, and always the feeling of being watched. One family reported that their children refused to play near the stone wall, saying they felt the presence there, as if someone was waiting just out of sight. Another tenant claimed to have seen ghostly figures standing outside the house, dressed in ragged uniforms, their faces pale and sorrowful. The house began to take on a life of its own in local lore. Some people avoided walking by it altogether, while others dared to knock on the door on moonless nights, hoping to catch a glimpse of something supernatural. Young himself never expressed any belief in the strange tales that surrounded his house. To him, the stones were just that, stones. But to others, they were much, much more than that. The Tombstone House still stands today, a relic of a strange, morbid past. Its walls hold the names of soldiers who died in one of America's most defining conflicts, men who gave their lives and whose memory was unwittingly woven into the fabric of a living home. Though many of the names were unknown, their presence is still felt. To walk past the house now is to walk in the shadow of history. The soldiers who once lay beneath those headstones may be long gone, but their stories remain etched in stone. If you enjoyed this video, please show your support by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. It really would mean the world to me. Also, you might like this playlist of scary ghost stories or haunted or cursed places on my channel. And as always, thank you for watching. Good night and sweet dreams. Bye-bye.